Yeah, let me sit there. Please, thank you. Okay, we're in the halachas of COVID. We're in the halachas of COVID, and we're dealing with the various tefilos, whether you can say certain of them be yechidus or not. Like we talked about Mogen of Vayechulu and Mogen Avos Friday night, and we talked about Kedusha. What about Yekum Purkan? Another part of Shabbos davening that may possibly not be recited by an individual are the paragraphs of Yekum Purkan recited by Ashkenazim immediately after the Haftorah, which are written in Aramaic. What's the background to this? The Shulchan Aruch rules, which we'll see shortly, that a congregation may daven in other languages when necessary. It should be noted that this is not commonly followed nowadays. We don't daven in English, we daven in Hebrew. But the Shulchan Aruch says that, if the congregation doesn't understand, you can daven in another language. But brings different opinions whether an individual may do so or not. That maybe a tzibur can daven in a different language, but not an individual. Nevertheless, even the lenient opinion holds an individual may not daven in Aramaic. Says the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Kuf Aleph, Yachol ispal b'chol lashon sheyirtzeh. You can daven in any language. Anim b'tzibur. Aval b'yachid lo yispal b'lashon hakodesh. You have to do it in Hebrew. V'yesh oimrim da'af yachid yesheshoel tzrochav. When he's, let's say, during Shemona Esrei, or at the end of Shemona Esrei, where you want to, before the Elokai Netzor, after you say the Yehud Ratzon, and people put in their personal tefillos, Yachol Lishon b'chol lashon sheyirtzeh, chutz milashon arami. Even there, for some reason, there's an exclusion. You can't use Aramaic. Why? The Mishnah Berurah explains that the angels do not know Aramaic. And the merit of an individual's tefillah alone is not always great enough to be heard by Hashem without the support of the angels. Now, this is a very complicated sugya here. Those of you who know the sheet of the Gra, that in Slichas there, where we at the end of Slichas, we say a prayer about the Malachim. The Gra said absolutely not. There's no intermediary between us and Hashem. However, this is going according to the opinion that in certain situations, there are intermediates with Malachim. Therefore, the Mishnah Berurah explains that one davening alone should not recite the Yekum Purkan paragraph written in Aramaic. Based on that, it says, the reason why you don't daven personal davening in Aramaic is the angels don't know. This is another power of Tefilah b'tzibur, that the tzibur doesn't need a melitz, let's say an interpreter or an attorney that brings his case in front of Hashem. Like we always say, a nifter should be a melitz yosher for somebody. So that's the same concept. A tzibur doesn't need that. The tzibur goes directly to Hashem. And so that's, again, another powerful reason why it's certainly better to daven with a tzibur than be yachidis, because you don't have this aspect. Arami, but tzibur mutter af lashon arami, right? The tzibur can daven in lashon arami, because again, this issue of the malachim is not relevant. Without shishaper madoimim yekum purkan aborach shmei b'tzibur b'chadoime. For example, the brich shmei after Vayibin Saron is also in Aramaic. That the tzibur can say. But again, according to this piece, the tzibur, the yachid would not say brich shmei either. Well, lefizem is palabed beis, so in yachol lomer shum yekum purkan. V'chein muchach ba'or zarua gadol b'hilchos Shabbos. He brings from the Or Zarua, who was a Risha on the same concept. By the way, that some people say that that's the reason why we start the Seder with halach ma'anya, which is, of course, in Aramaic. What's the pshat all of a sudden that we're starting something in Aramaic? It's to lay the ground rules that the Yetzias Mitzrayim was done completely by Kadosh Baruch Hu. Malachim don't understand Aramaic. We say hu v'lo saraf, hu v'lo malach. It was HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmo that took us out of Mitzrayim. So the fact that we start with halach manya and we show that we're not talking through malachim. Malachim are not involved here. Although the Shla and others do allow an individual to recite the first paragraph of Yekum Purkan, since it's a bracha for the Chacham in Eretz Yisrael, most of the contemporary halachic works, such as the Isha Yisrael, rule in accordance with the Mishnah Brura, and add that the Mishnah Berach for the congregation is also not recited when davening alone. That means even though the Mishnah Berach that follows the Yekum Purkan is in Hebrew, not in Aramaic, since it's introduced by these Aramaic paragraphs, we don't say it either, according to the Mishnah Brura and the Isha Yisrael. Says the Isha Yisrael, imispal b'yechidus, la'omer shum Yekum Purkan. We don't say Yekum Purkan if you're davening at home. I consider divrei achayim. The Gama Mishnah Berach, Loskim b'tzorach yitzirein lomar b'yechidus, sheheim birchas hakahal. It's a bracha that the Tzibur says. V'omnam ayin b'lekutei ma'ariach b'shem kitzur hashla, sheYekum Purkan harishon efshar lomar b'yechidus. The first Yekum Purkan you could say. V'atam kiven sheyesh bo bracha l'Rabbanan Eretz Yisrael. So you can say it. What about Anim Zmirot? The final section of the Tefilah on Shabbos we will address briefly here is Anim Zmirot. This is usually recited responsively by the Chazan congregation with the Aron Kodesh open. May this be recited by an individual as well, who does usually not have a Sefer Torah present, and there's no Chazan to do a responsive reading between a Chazan and a Kahal. Rav Yaakov Ariel, in response to a question not specifically about Corona, assumes that there is no reason why an individual, men or women, may not recite Anim Zmirot and permits it, though he questions whether one who does not understand the parables employed should recite it at all. Remember, Anim Zmirot is a very Kabbalistic tefillah. We say, Chavash Kova Barosho. It's very anthropomorphic. We treat Hashem in very human terms. He wears his battle headgear in battle, and Kesher Tefillin, Heralon, right? So he's bewarning us that, you know what, Anim Zmirot is a very complicated tefillah to really understand what's going on there. And it's probably better for if someone doesn't understand it, not to daven it even, shouldn't recite it. It says, Ayimuter li'isha b'yachad likro b'Shabbos shir hakavod. So ein hevdel ben ish li'isha v'chol adam yachal likro la'atzmo shir hakavod. It says there's no difference between men and women. Ein tzorach b'tzibur. El sheyesh mitnagdim le'etzem amira. There are those that oppose to say it. Ki asher mechel zimuyim rabim shetzorach l'farsham b'derech mashal. All sorts of imagery is used. It can't be understood literally. Umish lo yodeh l'farsham kalocha mutav shelo yomar shir zeh. Rav Hershel Shechter on the other hand holds that one does not recite Anim Zmirot privately, based on the approach of Rav Soloveitchik, that Anim Zmirot may qualify as a davar shebedusha, which requires a minyan. Mispal b'yechidus b'Shabbat v'yontov eino chayiv lomar piyud zeh, ki al kol pshuto lo nitken le'eom el b'tzibur. That means it was all instituted for tzibur dikad davening. V'od sh'Rabbeinu Zal, referring to Rav Yoshe Ber, hitziyav sherut lomar shedino kedavar shebedusha shetzorach hashara. He wanted to say that saying Anim Zmirot requires 10. The aminag hu shepoischim es ha'aron. The minig for Anim Zmirot is to open up the aron. V'chol ha'kahal omdim. Everybody stands. Well, pipshuto ein zebet they say for a Torah she'oimid ba'aron. It's not because of the Sefer Torah that's there. Remember, the only time you are halachically required to stand for a Sefer Torah is when it's on the move. For example, when the Sefer Torah is lying on the bima when the guy's laning it. You don't have to stand. There are those that are makpid to stand during laning. It's nothing to do with the Sefer Torah. Now, when the Torah moves, when you pick it up and you carry it, so there's a chiyuv to stand. And that's why it's problematic on Simchas Torah. When you're dancing with it, everyone has to stand at all times. But when the Sefer Torah is in the Aron, so it's in its normal position. Whether it's open or closed you don't technically have to stand. That's why, for example, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, people who can't stand, there's no chiyuv to stand when the Aron is in, when the Torah is in its Aron. That's just the side. So said Rav Yoshe Ber, people are standing because of the piyut. By the way, my Chazan Glickman, he was one of my rebbeim, he taught me laning and taught me davening. I sang in his choir in Beth Jacob. So he was from a family that descended from the Gra. The Gra had a minig to only say Anim Zmirot once a year on Yom Kippur. They did not, the Gra holds you don't say Anim Zmirot every Shabbos. You do it once a year on Yom Kippur because of the holiness of the Tefilah. So that goes along with this concept that we learned tonight. Okay, other halachos related to Tefilah at home. In addition to questions of which part of davening are skipped or changed when davening at home, there are many other halachos related to Tefilah of which one must be especially cognizant. In this section of the shiur, we will briefly discuss some of the most common issues. Is there a preferred time to daven at home? If one is not davening with a minyan, is there a preferred time to daven more specific than the general regular Zmanei Tefilah? Right? You know that the Zman of Shachris is 9:40, so you got to daven Shachris before 9:40. Or is there a better time? A partial answer to this question for our situation can be found in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch first describes the imperative to daven with a minyan, using the term yishtadel, one should try, and then suggests that if this is impossible, one should instead try to daven at the same time as those that daven in shul, either in their own community or elsewhere. That means if your shul's minyan davens at 6:15 in the morning, and you're not going to minyan because of COVID, you should be davening at 6:15, the same time as the tzibur davens. Yishtadel adam lispal b'beis hakneses im hatzibur. The imhu onus shel yochel lavel b'beis hakneses yichavin lispal b'shas hatzibur mispalin. You should do the tefillah at the same time. When we say tefillah, we're talking about when the kal is saying Shmona Esrei. You should daven the same time. Umogen Avram, v'uadin bein adam adorn b'yeshuvim. For example, somebody lives out in the sticks. They live out on a farm. They have minyan. There's no minyan even where they live. Kol makom yispalu shachris va'arvis bizman shat tzibur mispalalim. They should daven when the tefillah does. Now, let's just read the footnote 49. The language of Yishtadel seems to indicate that tefillah b'tzibur is a higher level of tefillah for which one should strive, but not necessarily an absolute obligation like other mitzvos. It doesn't say Yishtadel lecho matzah. It says chayiv lecho matzah the night of Pesach. It doesn't say Yishtadel. So, however, many poskim, such as Rav Moshe Feinstein, holds that it is indeed an obligation to daven tefillah b'tzibur, though, since it sometimes involves significant effort, such if the shul is located at a far distance, it is formulated as yishtadel. Now, Rav Ben Zion al-Ghazi, who is the author of the Tzurba Rabbanon, suggests that tefillah by an individual is still considered bona fide tefillah, which contrasts with korbanot brought by the tzibur, which may not be brought by an individual in any form. So what he's saying is, it's still tefillah, but remember, when shalmat parim sfasenu, our mouths have taken the place of korbanot, but there's only so many korbanot a yachid can bring. The tzibur, for example, brings the ola satamid, and a yachid can't bring that. So what Rav El-Ghazi is pointing out, that you're missing out on those korbanos that technically you cannot bring as a yachid. The situation of the coronavirus can clearly be considered as ones described by the Shulchan Aruch, that prevents one from davening in shul. Therefore, one who is unable to daven with a minyan, either because he's in isolation or because the local minyan has been canceled, is exempt from Tefilah b'tzibur, praying with the congregation. Nevertheless, it would be recommended to daven at the same time as the congregational minyan. But during times when there are nearly no minyanim, it would seem that the situation is more comparable to that described by the Ramah of a community without a regular minyan. But one should try to daven at the same time as a minyan elsewhere in locations where it's permitted if possible. Nevertheless, even this suggestion may be difficult due to the fact that during some of the coronavirus period, there were very few authorized minyanim in much of the world. And even those that are may be located in different time zones. So one suggestion given was for every community to establish a set time for everyone to daven, albeit in private. Is this also considered to be davening at the time of the tzibur? Rav Asher Weiss addresses this question in Minchas Asher. B'makom shenizgru batei knesios, where the shuls were closed, ubatla tfilas tzibur, and there is no tfilas tzibur. The kol echad mispalel b'yechidus, and everyone is davening by himself. Hayim roy shekulam yispalu b'sha'achas. Is it appropriate that we choose a time and everybody davens at the same time? Like it said in the Shulchan Aruch that you should try to daven when the tzibur davens. He says the foundation of the question, what's the benefit of the time that the tzibur is davening? That those tzibur that are davening in a minyan, perhaps the heavenly gates are open to them. And therefore, if we're davening at home at the same time, our tefillah like sneaks into the same gate that has been opened. Or maybe the kavana behind this concept of davening b'shash tefillah mitzpalalim, the afim eina mispalim basara. Maybe it means even if there is no minyan, maybe there's a special school that person should daven when other people are davening. And even though he might not carry in his bank account the mitzvah of tfilas hatzibur, mikol makom heavy bechlal tfilas rabim, but maybe he doesn't have tfilas hatzibur, but he has tfilas rabim. He's got the public davening with him. The nafkamina b'didon didan, the ein kan tfilat tzibur basar. Let's say in the corona times where there's no minyan, but we call makom yesh kan tfilas rabim. But if everyone davens at the same time, maybe it would be called tfilas rabim. V'lechura nira tfei. So Rav Asher Weiss says that it seems clear to him shenadavar toli b'minyan amispalim biyachad. He says it doesn't make a difference that you got to daven when a minyan is davening. He says it makes more sense that we should daven at the same time when everybody else is davening, that we set a time, everyone's davening at home, but we're going to daven at 8 o'clock in the morning. Sof davar, av shalom matzati b'zerai mefureshet. Rav Asher says, I didn't find a clear proof one way or the other. Nira deroy lekavua zman mesuyam shebo kulam yispalalu biyachad. He says the community should set up a time when everyone davens together, but they daven at home. He says, besides the skula that you'll get, that everyone's davening together, this would be a very good practical matter. That in our terrible times where the shuls are like lying empty, the kol echad mispalel beveso, and everyone's davening at home. Rav Asher is concerned that people are not going to be careful about the zmanei tefillah. The rabbim yizalzalu b'tfilasim. They will daven quickly. They won't have kavana. But if the community has set aside a time to daven together, perhaps this will be a chazaka to davening with kavanah. L'dati im efshar shekulam yispalu biyachad af yishmu zeh zeh vecha yishamish kamein shliach tzibur. He says that even you could daven with Zoom, or if you're not Zoom, let's say by neighbors, and you hear each other, and almost like one person serves as a shliach tzibur to finish each kapitel. Yisayim kol perik b'kol. Nach noah v'kach. He says it's very nice. Ach pashut u'bar shenim mitztarfim b'derech zu lo mar chazar sashat or kol davar. Like Rav Asher Weiss did not allow a minyan to occur via Zoom, but he has no problem. He thinks it's a milah for people to daven together on a Zoom, even though everyone is biyachidis and one person is like the shliach tzibur when he finishes the each kapitel, like you say, Magid Dvar Yaakov Chukah B'Shpatav Yisrael Asachel Go Chogoy Shvatim Ba'Yidom Alukah Viter. He was supportive of that concept. According to Rav Weiss, every individual in the community davening at the same time does qualify as davening alone at the same time as an actual minyan, though he's not 100% certain. Moreover, in order to ensure the effectiveness of everyone's tefillos, it's helpful to daven together by audio or live internet link, as this strengthens everyone psychologically, can often lead to greater kavanah. What about proper dress for tefillah? Even if one davens at home, one must wear presentable clothing for tefillah, just when going to shul. Lo yamod be'upun dato, a taska, means a tash, like a money belt. You shouldn't wear your money belt when you daven. V'lo b'rosh megula, not wearing your yarmulke. V'lo b'raglai megulim, not with bare feet. Im derech anshe hamokum shlo yamdu lifnei agdolim ela b'vatei regalim. That means if the practice is to appear in front of a dignitary with feet, with a foot covering, you can't daven without a foot covering. So we see from here that one must dress for tefillah in the manner that one would appear before a dignitary, regardless of the location. Therefore, when davening at home, it is certainly inappropriate to wear pajamas, slippers, or other clothing with which one would not leave the house. This point is explained clearly by the Mishnah Berurah and Piskei Teshuvos. Mishnah Berurah, "Eino derech kavod lamod kein lifnei Hashem yizbarach." It's not covered to stand this way. Chen enoch lispalel bekapoten ubeged atachtoin or b'shlafrok. Shlafrok is a nightgown. His tachtoinim is, of course, his tachtoinim, his undergarments, or a robe, like a bathrobe. Says the Piskei Teshuvos, Omnam imheim nekiyim heim umuhudorm ba'ofen shlo yizbayish lekabel ben beveso pnei orchim chashuvim. If they are clean and you wouldn't be embarrassed if you would accept a visitor this way, the Gambev Shortil, let's say Simon, if you would walk out to the street a little bit, Efshel Lahakel is Spalimon, you could daven with it. Agam Shel Mkomos Chashuvim, or maybe, but to the White House or to a wedding, you wouldn't go that way. It's not due to the inferior quality of the garment, but to a lifestyle. He wants to say that if the clothes are clean, and you would not be embarrassed to welcome somebody in your home wearing that, or you could even go outside for a short time, in such garments, the Piskei Teshuvos wants to say you could be lenient. Omnam, the Mabusher Sheina, he says in your pajamas, aimless power. Even if it covers your whole body, even like a robe, or like a gown, like a pajama made like a shirt, because you wouldn't greet a guest. You would never greet a guest in your home that way. Zulat b'cholo zake, or unless you were sick, or an elderly person, b'cholosh. For example, a sick person or an old person might be wearing that even when he receives visitors. He should try, even if you're sick and wearing these garments, you should try to put on an upper garment or a talus, if possible, above them. What about tefillah in the proper surroundings? It is sometimes more difficult to ensure that one's surroundings are clean when davening at home. A person must therefore be extra careful about these halachos when davening at home. The Shulchan Aruch rules that one may not daven when there are human feces nearby unless they are covered, even with a transparent covering. Soa ba'ashashit, which is a transparent container, mutter likros kenegda, aval pi sheroa ota derech dafnaseh. Even if you see the tsoa through the walls of the container, that's okay. Mishun de bikisui tal rachmana. The Torah says you have to cover it. Dichsi v'chisisa seyasecha. Miskase, and it's covered. So it's not a problem even if you see it so as long as it's covered. The Mishnah Berurah explains though that this only applies if one cannot smell it. If one can smell it, one must distance oneself from the smell. Kenegda, v'magia lo reach ra aser. And if he has a bad smell, you can't daven there. If there are very young children at home, it's important to ensure that they are clean or that one does not daven in their close vicinity. The Piskei Teshuvos further notes that if a child is sitting on a potty and the feces are covered, this is sufficient to permit davening nearby, provided that one does not smell them. If one does smell, one may use air freshener to clean the air. Tinok yoshev al asir umechseyu v'tatzor shebesocho al yedei gufo. If a child is sitting on a potty and his body's covering the tzoa, gam ken areza kikisu lahater amiras dover kedusha sham. That's considered, you could daven close to that. Av kolzot b'tnai shein reach b'noidim, as long as they don't smell. Ulam yoel lahatisham mitar over laver tarech. You can spray a deodorant there in order to daven there. What about erva? The halachos related to davening near women are also especially relevant with davening at home. And we'll briefly review some of the halachos. The Shulchan Aruch states that one is not allowed to recite Kriyat Shema in front of a woman who is not entirely dressed, including one's wife. The Mishnah Berurah notes that although the focus in all of these halachos is on Kriyat Shema, the same rule applies to any other tefillah or Torah study as well. So, tefach megula be'isha, b'makam shedarka l'chasosa. If a woman, any part of her body that me'ikra din has to be covered and is uncovered by a tefach, afilu hi ishto asur likros kriya shema kenegda. You can't read kriya shema next to her. B'seir shel isha shedarka l'chasosa asur likros kenegda. It's forbidden to read kriya shema near a woman whose hair is normally covered. Afilu ishto. So the Mishnah Berurah holds that even if a married woman only covers her hair in public, but not at home, a man is still forbidden from reciting Shema opposite her at home. If a woman's minig is to cover her hair only when she goes out, but she doesn't cover her hair at home or in the chutzner, in the courtyard, it still has the status of an erva. And if a tefach is revealed, you cannot read Kriya Shema there. The Aruch HaShulchan argues, though, that it is permitted to recite Kriya Shema in front of a married woman whose hair is uncovered, even if it's not one's wife, since many women nowadays leave their homes without covering their hair. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, Miwa kol panim l'dina nireh shemuter lanu lispalel ulevarech neged reishei sin hamegulos. We can make brachos and we can daven in front of women whose hair are not covered. Since the majority of women go, at least in public, with their hair uncovered. So what is the halacha concerning listening to women singing while trying to daven? right? Because we know kol be'isha erva, even the voice of a woman is considered an erva. So if a woman is singing, would you be able to be davening there? The Shulchan Aruch rules, based on the Gemara and Brachos, that one may not listen to a woman singing while reciting Kriyat Shema, and the Ramah adds that this applies even to one's wife. So it doesn't mean her speaking voice, it means if she's singing. Yesh Lizar Mishmias called Zemer, Isha B'Shas Kriyat Shema. Mafilu B'Isha Val Kol HaRogil Bo Eino Erva. But the voice, not singing, of one that you normally listen to is not considered an erva. One davening at home should constantly be careful to avoid the situations we've discussed. What about davening in the same room as a woman? May a man daven at home in the same room as his wife or other females? Either if they too are davening or if they are not. Right? In shul, it's forbidden without a mechitza, even if the only women present are his family members. But is a separation required at home as well? The opinion of Moshe Feinstein concerning family members davening alone is that seating without a mechitza is permitted, since the enactment of mechitza applies only in shul. Says the Igros Moshe, "Sha'alta im tzarech mechitza k'shespal b'makom she'ein kavul Tefilah." If you're davening in a place that is not a makom kavul Tefilah, im tzrichos hanoshim leilech lecheder nifra, do the women have to go to a different room? Or shadai behefsek avir? Or is this separation of space enough? Beveis chosen medina ein tzorach b'mechitza. Let's say in the house of a chosen, there's no need for mechitza. She'eino pasuach l'rabim. It's a private home. It's not open to the public. Elarak l'vnei hamishpacha. Lachein dai b'kach sheyelchu anoshim and spalalim l'zovis achas sheyuchlu l'chavin sham v'sham yispalu. It's the men can concentrate in one corner, and that's. I think we use the same heterim when we're at a wedding, and all of a sudden there's a mincha in a corner, right? There are women around, but we've isolated ourselves. We use this heter of Moshe as well. It's not a makom kavua, and we're not makpid that we use a mechitza there, or any that kind of these minyanim that are created, a banquet or this or that, and that's an important tshuva of Rav Moshe. According to this, it is better when davening at home to go to a separate part of the room or a separate room altogether where it'll be easier to concentrate, but no mechitza is necessary, whether the women are davening or not. Rav Moshe David Leibovitz also writes in his English series titled Halachically Speaking that this is the accepted halacha, and will make daven in the same room as one's wife or other family members at home. This is also the position of many other contemporary rabbanim. See the Isha Yisrael, Lalichos Shlomo, which is Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, concerning davening on a plane, and Rav Daniel Mann of Eretz Chemda, that are matir regarding this as well. So, in halachically speaking, it says there's no issue with men and women of the same family davening in the same room. The issue of having a mechitza only applies in a shul. However, homes are not meant for davening, and therefore have no requirement for a mechitza. This is even if one would daven there each day. Is it permitted to daven in front of a mirror or picture? The Mishnah Berurah rules that it is forbidden for two reasons. Number one, it appears that when you're bowing, that one is bowing down to his own image. That's if you're davening to a mirror. And it's difficult to maintain the proper level of kavana when looking at a picture at oneself. Right? Says the Mishnah Berurah, "Chen yesh li zoyer, shelo litzayer b'koisel beis hakneset siyurim neged panav shel adam." You shouldn't draw on the wall of a shul opposite where people that are looking directly, but if you're going to do it, it should be higher up than the person, so you're not davening it directly. The Mishnah Berurah derives this from a comment of the Ramah that drawing should not be sketched inside this sidurim so as to avoid potential distractions and loss of concentration. So the Mishnah Berurah extrapolated from that statement of the Ramah to say that if you're going to have drawings in shul, you should make it high up on the walls. Also, Lispala Keneged Amare, he says you shouldn't daven in front of a mirror. The Mechzik Mishtach Avela. He's davening, you're bowing down to your image. Ba'inu af beinaim stumos. Even if you close your eyes, because it's forbidden, because it disrupts your kavana. Rav Al-Ghazi in the bottom says that Rav Mordechai Eliyahu held the same way as the Mishnah Berurah. What about that? We all have a makom kavua in shul. Well, is there a concept of a makom kavua in your home? That means, should you daven in the same place all the time? Another important halacha mentioned by Shulchan Aruch is establishing a set location for davening. Although this is generally practiced at shul, the Piskei Teshuvos notes that the same halacha applies at home. Therefore, one should fix a regular place to daven if possible. I have a regular place during a vach, and if I happen to daven on Shabbos, I have a different place on Shabbos just to make it. Maybe that's not the right thing to do. You should probably daven in the same place every time, but that's just the way I've been doing it. Yikva bokom letfilaso shlo yishaneu im lo letzarech. You should also have a fixed place to daven and don't change it. Says the Piskei Teshuvos and Or Chaim, yesh lishko shegam im machmas oines mispalel beveso. The person is davening because of things beyond his control at home. He should set aside a makom for Tefilah. Even if it happens rarely. The reward is great. To the person who does that, he's considered a chassid, a humble person, and one of the Talmidim of Avram. Shekova bakom letfilaso. Tichsiv. Vayashkem Avram baboiker el hamakom asher amad sham. Uvetam hadavar kasav hashulchan aruch shatfilah doime lekorban. Tefillah is like a korban, like we said tonight. Shekol echad kavua memkoyim l'shchitaso matan domoy. Each korban had a different place for shchita and zrika. So, for example, those korbanos that were koche kadoshim, like a chatas and an osham or an ola, they had to be shechted north. If you took the Beis HaMikdash, you made a dividing line between east and west. So there was south and north. So those korbanos had to be shechted and kabbalah sadam down north. For example, a shlamim could be shechted anywhere. Could be shechted anywhere on the Zorah. So a higher level korban had to be shechted only in a specific spot. Number two, after you did kabbalah, after the shechit and you did kabbalah sadam, you had to do zrika adam on the mizbeach. You couldn't do it wherever you wanted. For a chatas, it's on the arba kronos. For an ola, it's matan shta. You have to do it two places where it splashes on one wall, on two walls in a corner, and two walls in a corner. Some of the korbanos had to be sprinkled above the chut hasikra. This was a line that divided the mizbeach 50-50. Some of the korbanos had to be above the line, some had to be below the line. So what the Piskei Teshuvos is saying is that since our tefillos are connected to korbanos because of neshama sorim b'sfasenu, therefore, just like a korban has a specific location, our tefillos have to have a specific location.
Because the kapara is the Zrika Saddam.
The kapara is the Zrika Saddam.
So that's the same thing.
And the Zrika Saddam location is critical.
Right, that's the ultimate.
But even the Shechita Sydney requires a certain place. So it's the Shechita and the kapara that requires a makom. That's why he said Shechitasa umatan damo, because the Shechita also has a specific place where not every korban can be shechted in the same place. When we choose to daven a certain place, there's a certain holiness there. The language is beautiful. That by you choosing a spot to daven, gives that place, even in your house, a higher kedusha, and that kedusha is helping your tefillah. The roisham kedusha toifeses makoima. The roisham, the imprint of this holiness grabs its place. When nishera sham lo'ilam, remains there forever. The gamashinu mokom yisoviv sidra lo'adam l'chol mareinav asher yira mechodosh. When you change a place, it distracts a person. He won't see certain things the same way he sees them. The yufra kavanas tefillah might interfere with his concentration. Then when you daven at home, you should avoid distractions. It's often more difficult to avoid distractions when davening at home, as opposed to a shul, where all of those in the room are davening together and distractions are hopefully minimal. One's home may be loud and noisy, with potential distractions, including music playing, computers being used, children making noise. The Shulchan Aruch rules that one should not hold any objects while davening Shemona Esrei that could cause distractions. Kishum ispala lo yochaz biyado tefillin, v'lo sefer michtevei hakodesh. When you daven Shemona Esrei, you should not hold on tefillin. You should not hold sifrei kodesh. V'lo ka'ara meleya, not a plate. V'lo saki, not knife. Not ma'os, ukikar bread mitnei shalibu aleim. You will be distracted. Shlo yiplu v'yitar v'titzbal kavanaso. The lulav bizmanu mutter. A lulav, when it's the zman of mitzvah is permitted, la'oichas biyado, kiven shachiz biyado hu mitzvah eno nitrid b'shvilo. It's a mitzvah, is not distracted. So, gentlemen, based on what we just learned, what's a major problem in our time?
The telephone.
Our cell phones. And I think Tzvika has a whole shir on this regarding this. Many of us use the iPhone and the phones we have as a siddur, right? We open up the siddur and we daven minchad ma'ariv from that. Now, maybe that's a heter, because maybe if the phone is on and we have it in a siddur, so we said the whole problem is distraction. Well, if you need the phone because you're needing it as a siddur, so that's the only question. Is it, maybe it's not considered a distraction, maybe it would be permitted. But based on this, otherwise, halachically, we have a problem holding the phone during Shemona Esrei.
Because of the
Even if
fact
you
that it's a
daven-
distraction, because of the fact that it's a distraction, you shouldn't be davening in the telephone. Why don't they say that in the cell phone?
It could be, you're very correct. That means since at any time, all of a sudden your cell phone may ring and it's a worse distraction, it could be that the halacha is you should not be holding the cell phone and you should not be davening from it. And the way to get around it is just put it down, put it on a table in front of you, but you wouldn't be able to hold it.
Yeah, because even davening, you get a message, you're gonna distract you when you see a message popping up or whatever.
So there you go. So I'm saying me'ikar adin, we probably should not be holding the phone during Shemona Esrei. You should put it down on the stender, and you will not be over this halacha of you're not allowed to hold something in your hand when you daven. Based on this idea, one should also certainly try to daven in a location where other distractions, such as the ones mentioned above, music, computers, when one is not holding specific items, are minimal, such as a quiet office room or bedroom. What about eating before mincha and ma'ariv? Another important halacha that is especially relevant at home is the prohibition of eating a meal before davening mincha. The same halacha applies to ma'ariv as well, though all agree that even a small meal, i.e. eating more than a kibetz of bread, is included. Shulchan Aruch and Ramah cite a number of different opinions concerning the size of the meal, included very large or small, in the prohibition, and the time at which the prohibition begins. Mincha Gedola, which is 6.5 hours of the day, or Mincha Ketana, which is 9.5 hours in the day. Right? In a regular day, let's say March 22nd, which is coming up soon, where 12, the day and night are exactly equal. 12-hour night, 12-hour day. So that's 6 o'clock to noontime is the first 6 hours. Then noontime to 6 p.m. that's if you have sunrise exactly at 6 o'clock and sunset at 6 p.m. That's not exactly the case. but it's 12 hours, 12 hours. So how long shows Zmanios will be either 6.5 hours, let's say it's 6 to 6, would be either 12:30 or it would be 3:30, either Mincha Ketana, Mincha Gdola. The din is, once that time of Mincha comes, it's usher to eat until you daven Mincha. So if you hold Mincha Gdola, and it's 12:30 comes along, and you can't eat. You got to have Mincha before you eat. So if you hold that it's Mincha Gdola, then you can eat until Mincha Gdola. We'll see in a minute.
Just
So-
as a point of view, next week, looking at the calendar, as Man Talis Tefillin is 6 a.m. exactly.
Oh, so there you go. So there you go. So the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah cite a number of different opinions, right? We said, and the same in which the prohibition begins. The Ramah concludes that the custom is to allow even eating a small meal during the latter part of the afternoon, due to the custom that existed in earlier times, that the shamish would call everyone when it's time to come to shul for mincha. It says, "V'lo le'echol, v'nogul ha'akel k'shteas svaros da'ayna b'suda g'dola samach le'mincha g'dola." Right? They were makel by the lunch meal near 12:30. U'v'suda k'tana, they would take a snack samach le'mincha k'tana. V'efshar ha'tam mishum da'achshav korla beis ha'knesses. Now that we're called to shul l'chayshin and dilma yivshav lo'yispal, we're not concerned that people are going to forget and not daven. Although nowadays we don't have a muezzin, lahavdil, no one calls people to come to shul. The Aruch HaShulchan and many modern poskim suggest that the same leniency applies to one who regularly davens with a minyan in shul. That you don't have to be makbid on this din. However, the Aruch HaShulchan stresses then one may not eat a meal before mincha or mariv when one davens alone. Be'emet, First of all, we don't have this heter anymore because people don't get called. The fact that we eat after Zman Mincha Ketana, the commotion is Bar Le'el, L'inyan Lilmod Kodim Tefilah Shachris, right? The Indian of learning before Tefilah Shachris, the Mispalo B'Yechidus Osir Lilmod, that if you daven at home, you may not learn before you daven. Because if you start learning, you're gonna delay Zman Tefilah. But this doesn't apply to those who daven in shul, mutter, the same thing regarding eating. That which we said that you should not eat until you daven, that was if you daven by yourself. Once you gather the minyan, you're not going to forget to daven. However, one who doesn't daven mincha in a minyan, he must daven mincha before he eats lunch. If the zman mincha gdola has come, if it's before mincha gdola, you can eat. But if all of a sudden the time of mincha gdola comes, you should not eat lunch until you daven mincha. The kol shekein achar zman zeh. This is the accepted approach as practical halacha. One should make sure not to eat a meal more than a kidzetz of bread, which is 55 grams, before davening mincha or mariv. Alternatively, Moshe David Leibovitz cites contemporary poskim who allow asking another person to remind him to daven or setting an alarm clock as a reminder. That means if you set an alarm clock, then you can eat. There are many places in halacha where we have the concept of shomer, someone to watch and make sure one davens. Some poskim say that if one has a shomer who will remind him to daven, then he may eat a small meal even within a half hour of mincha ketana. For example, if one's wife is eating with him and she'll remind him to daven, then he may eat. The poskim discuss whether setting an alarm clock on your phone would serve the same purpose as a shomer, to remind someone to stop eating and refrain from doing other activities when the time for mincha ketana arrives. It seems that this suffices only if one has a tendency to act once the alarm goes off and not snooze through it. So what's the conclusion? The pandemic of COVID-19 has certainly impacted significantly on many aspects of our lives, including davening in shul. Nevertheless, we should try to use those times in which we must daven at home as an opportunity to strengthen our kavanah during tefillah in ways that are sometimes difficult in shul, where you try to keep pace with the chazan. In addition, one can consider involving children and other family household members in davening in ways that are not always possible in shul. We pray that the difficulties, illness, and death caused by the pandemic will pass soon. But in the meantime, let us capitalize on the opportunities presented to us to strengthen our Tefilah with renewed vigor and inspiration. So that concludes tonight. Next week, we will talk about Kriyas HaTorah in the era of COVID-19. And I did get volume 7, which is Hilchos Nida. Mirz Hashem, we will finish that. We'll start that once we finish these halachas, and I will start distributing them. Any other comments, questions, ha'aros that anyone would like to make?
Ernie, don't forget where you have to go back to Sfiras Ha'oma before Nida.
Right, we have to finish volume 6. We'll try to do it b'sha'ato. We'll try to do it maybe right after we finish it while we're still in the Zman of Sfiras Ha'omer.
Chol HaMoed, Mirz Hashem.
Maybe Chol HaMoed. Maybe we'll do an additional additional session just to cover Sfiras Ha'omer. So we'll talk about it.